My husband secretly handed over every dollar of our savings to his mistress, convinced he had secured the perfect future without me. He mocked my warnings and celebrated his new beginning. I said nothing. But hidden behind one document was a secret he never knew existed. Days later, his confidence shattered when an unexpected discovery turned his entire world upside down. I had remained silent. I had watched. I had let his own greed pave his road straight to complete ruin. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who underestimated your worth and tried to tear you down. Growing up navigating the unpredictable foster care system, I learned early on that the only person who would ever truly protect me was myself. I fought fiercely for every academic scholarship, built my crisis management firm from absolute scratch, and secured my own financial independence long before I ever met Marcus. He was a vice president at a major financial firm here in Atlanta, the undisputed golden boy of a prominent family who prided themselves on their generational wealth and flawless public image. They were the absolute epitome of what they proudly called Black excellence. However, behind closed doors, their excellence was nothing more than a carefully curated facade built entirely on crushing anyone they deemed socially inferior. I walked into our $2 million penthouse on a Tuesday evening. The massive space was usually filled with the warm glow of evening sunlight, but today the air felt suffocatingly cold and unnaturally still. My heels clicked heavily against the Brazilian hardwood floors as I made my way into the expansive custom kitchen. Sitting perfectly centered on the massive marble island were two distinct pieces of paper. The first was a freshly printed divorce petition. The second was a bank wire transfer receipt. $1,200,000 had been completely drained from the account Marcus falsely believed was our joint life savings. Heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed from the floating glass staircase. Marcus descended dressed immaculately in a custom-tailored Italian suit, pulling a sleek designer leather suitcase behind him. His face held a look of supreme arrogance, a smug satisfaction that told me he had been meticulously planning this exact moment for months. "You saw the receipt, Maya," he said, his voice dripping with intense condescension. "I transferred every single dollar to Chloe. She is pregnant. She is giving me a son, a true heir to carry on my family name and our legacy. That is something a barren woman like you could never do." The cruelty in his words was intentional, meticulously designed to strike at the deepest insecurities we had supposedly shared as a married couple. We had spent years dealing with painful fertility struggles, and he was now weaponizing that shared pain to break me. I looked at the bank receipt. I looked at the expensive leather suitcase. I looked at the arrogant face of the man I once called my husband. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not drop to the floor in agony. "My mother was absolutely right about you," Marcus continued, stepping closer to the island and leaning forward to ensure I felt the full weight of his contempt. "Marrying a woman with absolutely no family background, an orphan with no legacy to her name, was the most ridiculous mistake of my entire life. You run a crisis public relations firm. You handle messy scandals for local celebrities. You have absolutely no idea what real generational power looks like. You do not understand the elite standards of my family. The papers are signed on my end. I expect you completely packed and out of this penthouse before sunrise." I picked up the heavy gold pen resting next to the legal documents. My hand did not shake even slightly. I signed my name with smooth, deliberate strokes on the divorce papers and pushed them back across the cold marble surface. "Are you completely sure that money actually belongs to you, Marcus?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm and measured. Marcus let out a harsh, mocking laugh that echoed off the high ceilings. His eyes swept over me with pure, unfiltered disgust. He reached into his tailored pocket, pulled out his heavy platinum wedding band, and tossed it carelessly onto the floor. It rolled and clattered loudly against the wooden baseboards. "Enjoy your empty life, Maya," he sneered before turning his back, grabbing his luggage, and walking out the front door without a single glance backward. The heavy oak door clicked shut, leaving me completely alone in the vast, silent penthouse. I did not move. I just stood there letting the harsh reality of his departure settle into the quiet space. Exactly 3 seconds later, my cell phone began to ring. The caller ID flashed the name Brent. Brent was Marcus's brother-in-law. He was a white man married to Marcus's sister Tasha, and he ran a boutique investment brokerage firm that catered exclusively to wealthy families in the city. Brent had always possessed a grating sense of superiority, a brand of arrogant, unearned privilege that made every single interaction with him utterly exhausting. I answered the call, bringing the phone to my ear without saying a single word. "Listen closely." Maya Brent's voice came through the speaker, thick with condescending authority and smug satisfaction. "I just helped Marcus move all of those funds into an offshore trust in the Cayman Islands through my private brokerage. Every single penny is locked away tight. No one, not you, not your cheap lawyers, and not any court in this entire state will ever be able to touch it. Do not bother throwing a tantrum or trying to fight back against us. Our family retains the most ruthless legal team in Atlanta. Do the smart thing and quietly pack your cheap bags. Get out of that property and disappear before we make things truly difficult for you." The sheer audacity of this man calling me specifically to gloat on behalf of my cheating husband, attempting to intimidate me with his unearned confidence, was almost laughable. I remained completely silent. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I did not threaten him with legal action. I simply pressed the end call button and placed the phone face down on the marble counter. My silence was a sharpened blade quietly preparing itself for the execution. I walked over to the spacious living room and opened my laptop. Brent thought he was an absolute mastermind, protecting the wealth of his elite in-laws. He thought he was completely untouchable behind his corporate shields. What neither Brent nor Marcus knew was that I had spent the last 6 months conducting a quiet, highly thorough audit of their precious family investments. The Cayman Island Trust Brent just bragged about using was not a legitimate wealth management tool. It was actually an elaborate tax evasion shell company. I knew this for a fact because I was the exact person who had anonymously handed over a meticulously compiled dossier about that exact trust to the Federal Bureau of Investigation several months ago. Brent was not hiding Marcus's money to protect it from me. Brent was frantically siphoning Marcus's money to cover a massive illegal deficit in his own fraudulent accounts before the federal agents finally closed in on him. I sat down on the white leather sofa and logged into the highly secure internal server of MCOR Crisis Management. MCOR was my company. I was the sole founder, the chief executive officer, and the 100% shareholder. Marcus had always belittled my career, treating my massive agency like a cute little side project I did just to pass the time. He firmly believed his high-ranking position at the bank made him the undisputed financial genius of our household. Because of his towering ego and blatant misogyny, he never bothered to actually read the complex financial documents I occasionally asked him to review. He blindly assumed the account he had just drained was our joint personal savings accumulated entirely from his annual banking bonuses. It was not. The account Marcus had just emptied of $1,200,000 was a dedicated corporate tax holding account for MCOR. It contained federal tax reserves meant directly for the government. For pure convenience, during a brief period when I was traveling internationally for work, I had granted Marcus a temporary, highly limited proxy access to manage some minor vendor transfers. He had just stolen federal corporate tax funds. But the trap ran much deeper than a simple, unauthorized withdrawal. I pulled up the digital copy of the investment guarantee contract Marcus had signed with Brent 6 months prior. Marcus genuinely thought he was merely setting up a high-yield wealth management profile to multiply his bonuses. He never read the fine print. Buried clearly on the final page of that heavy legal contract was an unconditional personal guarantee. Marcus had not just transferred cash today. He had officially signed his name as the primary personal guarantor for a $15 million commercial debt belonging to a shell corporation owned entirely by Brent. I reached for my phone and dialed my lead corporate attorney. The secure line connected immediately. Activate Clause 4B across all of our financial systems. I commanded, my voice echoing clearly in the empty penthouse. Revoke every single proxy authorization Marcus holds immediately. Lock the corporate accounts and notify the federal authorities of the unauthorized withdrawal. I leaned back against the comfortable leather sofa, watching the sprawling city lights of Atlanta begin to flicker on outside my floor-to-ceiling windows. Marcus wanted a perfect future built on stolen money and a pregnant mistress. He thought he had completely destroyed me. He had absolutely no idea that I had just let him dig his own grave, and I was fully prepared to bury him in it. The glowing screen of my laptop illuminated the dark marble of the kitchen island. I did not shed a single tear for the end of my marriage. Tears were a luxury for women who had the safety net of generational wealth to fall back on. I had built my empire from the ground up with my own bare hands. I typed my master password into the highly secured portal of MCOR Crisis Management. The system authenticated my fingerprint and granted me access to the highest level of administrative control. I was the sole founder. I was the chief executive officer. I owned 100% of the shares. Marcus had always treated my firm like a glorified hobby. He genuinely believed that his title as a bank vice president made him the undisputed financial genius of our household. His towering ego demanded that he be the provider, the ultimate authority on all things money. Because of his blatant misogyny, he never bothered to actually read the complex corporate financial documents I occasionally left on his desk. He blindly assumed the account he had just drained was our joint personal savings accumulated entirely from his annual banking bonuses. It was not. I clicked on the transaction history. The red numbers glared back at me. $1,200,000 successfully wired out. Marcus thought he had outsmarted me. He thought he had taken my life savings to fund his new life with his pregnant assistant. But the account he had just emptied was a dedicated corporate tax holding account for MCOR. It contained federal tax reserves meant directly for the Internal Revenue Service. During a chaotic 2-week period last quarter, when I was traveling internationally to handle a massive public relations disaster for a client in London, I had granted Marcus a temporary, highly restricted proxy access to our banking portal. It was a simple convenience to manage some minor vendor transfers while I was across the Atlantic. I had never revoked the access because I never thought my own husband would use it to rob me. Marcus had not just stolen his own bonuses, he had just stolen federal corporate tax funds. He had committed wire fraud and federal embezzlement. And he had done it using a traceable IP address right here in our penthouse. But the trap ran much deeper than a single unauthorized withdrawal. I navigated to the legal archives on my server. I needed to see exactly what kind of paperwork Marcus and Brent had executed. I pulled up the digital copy of the investment guarantee contract Marcus had signed with Brent's brokerage firm 6 months prior. Marcus had bragged about this deal for weeks. He genuinely thought he was merely setting up a high-yield offshore wealth management profile to multiply his assets away from the prying eyes of the American tax system. He trusted Brent completely because Brent was part of the family, and in the Williams family protecting the bloodline was everything. I scrolled through the dense legal jargon. Page 10, page 20, page 42. There it was. Buried beneath layers of complex financial terminology on the final page of that heavy legal contract was an unconditional personal guarantee. Marcus had not just transferred cash today. He had officially signed his name as the primary personal guarantor for a massive commercial debt. It was a $15 million toxic loan belonging to a shell corporation owned entirely by Brent. Brent had known his brokerage was failing. He needed a scapegoat with enough verifiable assets and a high enough banking profile to secure the debt. He found the perfect victim in his arrogant, legally illiterate brother-in-law. Brent was not protecting Marcus and his money in the Cayman Islands. Brent had taken that $1.2 million as a desperate drop in the bucket to appease his own creditors, while legally anchoring the remaining $15 million debt directly around Marcus and his neck. If Brent defaulted, and I knew for a fact the FBI was about to ensure that the creditors would not go after Brent. They would come straight for Marcus. They would seize his bank accounts, garnish his executive wages, and liquidate every single asset attached to his name. I reached for my phone and dialed the direct line to my lead corporate attorney. The secure line connected immediately. Activate Clause 4B across all of our financial systems. I commanded, my voice echoing clearly in the quiet kitchen. Are you completely sure? Maya, my attorney, asked. Activating this protocol will instantly freeze the proxy. I am entirely sure, I replied smoothly. Revoke every single proxy authorization Marcus holds immediately. Lock the corporate accounts and notify the bank's fraud department of the unauthorized withdrawal. Do not mention his name yet. Just flag the transaction as a hostile breach. Consider it done. We will secure the perimeter. I ended the call and placed the phone face down on the cold marble. I walked slowly over to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sprawling city lights of Atlanta. Marcus wanted a perfect future built on stolen money and a pregnant mistress. He wanted to discard me like a piece of trash because I did not fit the pristine elite mold of his aristocratic family. He thought he had completely destroyed me. He had absolutely no idea that I had just let him dig his own grave. I poured myself a fresh glass of red wine, the rich liquid swirling against the crystal. The war had not even officially started, and the opposing general had already handed me his sword. I took a slow sip, savoring the taste. Let him celebrate his new beginning tonight. By tomorrow, the ground beneath his feet would begin to crumble. The morning sun broke through the automated blinds of my penthouse, casting sharp lines of light across the immaculate floors. I had barely slept, fueled by a potent mix of adrenaline and cold calculation. I dressed meticulously in a tailored emerald green suit, a color that commanded attention and radiated absolute authority. I pinned my hair back into a sleek, unforgiving style. Today was not a day for vulnerability. Today was the first day of my counteroffensive. I drove my car to the towering glass and steel building that housed the MCOR headquarters in downtown Atlanta. The drive was peaceful. The morning traffic parted around me like the Red Sea. When I stepped into the private executive elevator and swiped my access card, I felt an overwhelming sense of clarity. This company was my lifeblood. I had sacrificed my youth, my peace of mind, and ultimately my marriage to build this empire. No one was going to take a single brick of it away from me. I stepped out onto the executive floor. The hushed professional hum of my staff working diligently brought a genuine smile to my face. My assistant, a sharp young woman named Sarah, approached me immediately with her tablet ready. Good morning, Maya. The legal team confirmed the account freeze at 6 in the morning. The bank is currently investigating the wire transfer as a Class 1 federal breach. Excellent work, Sarah, I said, walking briskly toward my corner office. Hold all my calls for the next hour, unless it is the legal department. I sat behind my massive desk and opened my laptop. The financial feeds showed the exact moment the trap had locked shut. Marcus and his access to the MCOR portal was permanently terminated. He was now officially locked out of the very system he had just robbed. He had severed his own lifeline without even realizing it. I knew the timeline of what was about to happen. Marcus would attempt to use his own personal credit cards to secure a luxury suite for him and Chloe. He would want to shower her with gifts to celebrate their victory over me. He would try to swipe his pristine black card, expecting the limitless funds of a bank vice president. But because the fraud department was already tracking his IP address and the associated accounts linked to his personal profile, the domino effect was inevitable. I checked the time. It was 9 in the morning. The banks were officially open. The federal clearinghouses were processing the night and its transactions. Marcus and his world was currently operating on borrowed time. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and waited for the first explosion. I did not have to wait long. But the first strike did not come from Marcus. It came from the very people who had molded his toxic entitlement. The heavy glass doors of my conference room were about to be tested. The morning sun pierced through the floor-to-ceiling glass of my corner office at MCOR Crisis Management. I had arrived before dawn, functioning on black coffee and the cold, sharp adrenaline of a woman who had just reclaimed her life. My desk was a fortress of polished mahogany, and the Atlanta skyline stretched out behind me like a conquered territory. I was reviewing the preliminary freeze reports from our corporate banking partners when the heavy glass doors of my executive suite were violently shoved open. My mother-in-law, Valerie, marched into the room, trailing the overwhelming scent of expensive floral perfume and aggressive entitlement. She was dressed in a pristine Chanel silk suit, her posture rigid with the manufactured arrogance of a woman whose entire identity was built on her husband and his last name. Right behind her was her daughter, Tasha, clutching a designer handbag, like a shield, her face twisted into a familiar sneer. "How dare you lock my supplemental credit card?" Valerie demanded, slamming her manicured hands flat onto my desk. "You think you can throw a petty tantrum just because my son finally came to his senses and left you?" I did not flinch. I did not stand up. I simply folded my hands on the desk and looked at the two women who had spent the last 7 years making me feel like a second-class citizen in my own marriage. "You need to accept reality," Maya, Tasha chimed in, crossing her arms. "Chloe is young, she knows how to listen, and most importantly, she is giving this family a male heir. That is something you could never do, no matter how much of my brother and his money you wasted trying. Marcus taking that cash was his rightful reward for enduring years of your boring, barren company." The cruelty was so calculated, so specific, that it almost impressed me. They truly believed that because I came from the foster system, because I lacked a pretentious family pedigree, I would simply absorb their abuse and quietly disappear. "Brent has already handled all the legalities." Tasha continued, her voice dripping with triumph. "You have absolutely nothing left to fight with. Do not embarrass yourself by trying to cling to our family name." I opened my bottom desk drawer. I pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder and tossed it onto the center of the desk. It landed with a loud, satisfying thud. "Do you want to talk about enduring, Valerie?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "Open it." Valerie glared at me but snatched the folder. Her eyes scanned the top document and the color instantly drained from her perfectly powdered face. "Those are the medical bills from my 4 rounds of in vitro fertilization," I stated clearly. $60,000 of debt. You sat in my living room and cried fake tears begging me to give you a grandson. You forced me to inject my body with hormones until I was physically sick. You promised that the Williams Family Trust would cover every single medical expense. But the moment the fourth transfer failed, the moment the doctor told you I might never carry a child, you canceled the checks. You left me to pay off that massive debt completely alone while you whispered to your country club friends that I was a defective woman. Valerie opened her mouth to speak, but I stood up, leaning over the desk, forcing her to step back. "I did not lock your supplemental credit card, Valerie. The federal government did." Tasha dropped her smug demeanor instantly. "What are you talking about?" "Your brilliant son did not steal our personal savings," I explained, enunciating every word so there could be no misunderstanding. "He drained a corporate tax account belonging entirely to my firm. He triggered an automatic federal fraud alert. The bank flagged his profile and by extension, they froze every single account connected to his name, including the allowance he gives you." Valerie stumbled backward, her hand flying to her chest. "You are lying. Marcus is a vice president. He knows exactly what he is doing." "Then, I suggest you ask him to buy your lunch today," I said, pressing the intercom button on my desk. "Security, please escort these two unauthorized visitors out of the building. Do not let them back in under any circumstances." Tasha tried to shout something as two massive security guards stepped into the office, but the panic in her eyes betrayed her bravado. I watched in absolute silence as the guards firmly guided the frantic, struggling women out of my corporate sanctuary. The toxic influence of the Williams family was officially purged from my professional space, but Valerie was nothing if not stubbornly committed to her delusions. That evening, desperately trying to maintain the illusion of control and high society dominance, she hosted a lavish private dinner at Atlanta and its most exclusive French restaurant. It was an official welcoming party for Chloe. I knew all about it because Marcus and his frantic maxed-out credit card attempts were still generating automated decline reports in my corporate security log. He had eventually been forced to use a high-interest payday advance just to cover the cost of the evening, a humiliating reality he was undoubtedly keeping secret from his mother. According to the mutual acquaintances who gleefully reported back to me, the dinner was a masterclass in fake opulence. Chloe arrived wearing a tight, inappropriate maternity dress, clinging to Marcus and his arm like a fragile prize. She basked in the attention, playing the role of the fertile, obedient savior of the Williams bloodline. "I want to toast to the future," Valerie had announced, raising a glass of sparkling water. "To a real woman who knows how to honor this family." Chloe smiled her most practiced, innocent smile. "Thank you, Mother Valerie. I am just so excited for tomorrow. I am going straight to the Beacon Hill mansion with my contractors. I am having them rip out those awful dark hardwood floors and smash that cheap marble island. I want to throw every single piece of Maya and her depressing furniture onto the street. My son deserves to be born into a home that feels fresh and expensive." Marcus kissed her cheek, smiling through the mounting terror he must have been feeling about his frozen bank accounts. "Whatever you want, baby. That house belongs to us now. It is your castle." They toasted to their stolen kingdom, completely oblivious to the fact that their castle was built on quicksand. While they were clinking crystal glasses and plotting the destruction of my interior design choices, I was sitting in my penthouse living room with my chief legal counsel. We were not drinking champagne. We were reviewing certified property deeds. Marcus had an incredible talent for believing his own lies. When we moved into the spectacular Beacon Hill property 3 years ago, his credit had been secretly ruined by a series of disastrous personal investments he begged me to keep hidden from his father. To save us from public embarrassment, I had stepped in. I purchased the $2 million home entirely in cash using the profits from my firm. I placed the deed exclusively under a subsidiary holding company owned by MCOR. Marcus never owned a single brick of that house. His only contribution was paying the monthly property taxes and maintenance fees, which allowed him to boast to his friends that he was the master of the estate. He had lived the lie for so long that he actually believed it was the truth. He truly believed he could legally kick me out and move his mistress into a property owned entirely by my corporation. I signed my name at the bottom of the eviction notice and handed the heavy stack of documents back to my lawyer. "Have the local precinct meet her there tomorrow morning," I instructed, my voice devoid of any sympathy. "When she tries to break down my walls, make sure she understands exactly who owns the ground she is standing on." The trap was fully set. Chloe wanted to play the triumphant queen stepping into her newly conquered palace. She was about to find out that the palace had a highly sophisticated security system, and the rightful queen was not interested in taking prisoners. I remained perfectly still. I looked at Valerie. I looked at Tasha. I looked at their pathetic, vain delusions. I did not flinch or rise from my executive leather chair. I simply let the silence stretch out heavy and suffocating, allowing their arrogant words to hang in the air until the sheer weight of their stupidity began to settle over the room. "You really think this is about a credit card, Valerie?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Yet it commanded the entire expanse of my corner office. "You burst into my corporate headquarters screaming like a common street vendor to defend a man who just committed a federal crime." Valerie slammed her hand against my desk again, her diamond rings clattering sharply against the polished mahogany. "Do not use that tone with me. Marcus is a vice president. He took what rightfully belonged to him. He endured your cold, barren home for 7 years. Chloe is giving us a legacy. She is giving us a son." The word barren hung in the air. For a fleeting second, the pristine facade of my office melted away, and I was transported back to a Thanksgiving dinner 3 years ago. I had just suffered my second miscarriage. My body was bruised from hormone injections, my heart shattered into a million unrecognizable pieces. Valerie had stood up at the head of the long dining table, clinking her crystal glass, and announced to our extended family that she was praying Marcus would soon find a woman capable of fulfilling her biological duty. Tasha had laughed a high, piercing sound and patted my shoulder, telling me I could always focus on my little public relations hobby instead. They had humiliated me in my darkest hour, stripping away my humanity for their own twisted entertainment. I blinked, the memory fading as the reality of my absolute power snapped back into focus. I opened my bottom desk drawer and pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. I tossed it onto the center of the desk. It landed with a loud, satisfying thud. "Do you want to talk about endurance, Valerie?" I asked smoothly. "Open it." Valerie glared at me, her chest heaving with manufactured aristocratic outrage, but she snatched the folder. Her eyes scanned the top document, and the color instantly drained from her perfectly powdered face. "Those are the medical bills from my 4 rounds of in vitro fertilization," I stated clearly, ensuring every syllable landed like a physical blow. $60,000 of debt. You sat in my living room and cried fake tears begging me to give you a grandson. You promised that the Williams Family Trust would cover every single medical expense. But the moment the 4th transfer failed, the moment the doctor told you I might never carry a child, you canceled the checks. You left me to pay off that massive debt completely alone while you whispered to your country club friends that I was a defective woman. Tasha rolled her eyes and crossed her arms, desperate to regain the upper hand. "Nobody forced you to do those treatments, Maya. You are just bitter because Chloe succeeded where you failed. And now Brent has ensured that Marcus and his money is locked away in the Cayman Islands. You will not get a single dime of it for your so-called emotional distress." I shifted my gaze to Tasha. Her smug confidence was the most entertaining part of this entire morning. I reached into another drawer and pulled out a sleek black flash drive, plugging it into my secure terminal. "Tasha, your absolute faith in your husband is almost touching," I said, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the desk. "You genuinely believe Brent is a financial mastermind. You think he is hiding Marcus and his money to protect the family." "Of course he is," Tasha snapped, though her posture stiffened slightly. "Brent manages wealth for the most elite families in Atlanta. He knows exactly how to shield assets from greedy, soon-to-be ex-wives like you." "Brent manages a Ponzi scheme, Tasha," I corrected her, my voice dropping to a terrifying calm. "And he is currently drowning." I clicked on my screen, opening a highly secured encrypted folder. I brought up a comprehensive financial audit, specifically a file named Duyen Mao 1_10.docx. Tasha let out a harsh, nervous laugh. "You are completely delusional." "Am I?" I tapped the keyboard, opening the next piece of evidence, a file named Duyen Mao 2_10.docx. "3 months ago, I conducted a quiet, highly thorough audit of your husband and his boutique brokerage firm. The Cayman Island Trust he bragged about using for Marcus is not a legitimate wealth management tool. It is an elaborate tax evasion shell company. I know this for a fact because I am the exact person who anonymously handed over a meticulously compiled dossier about that exact trust to the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Valerie gasped, taking a stumbling step backward. Her designer handbag slipped from her shoulder, hitting the floor. "You did what?" "But it gets better, Tasha." I continued, refusing to break eye contact with my sister-in-law. I opened Duyen Mao 3_10.docx on the monitor. Brent was not hiding Marcus and his money to protect it from me. Brent was frantically siphoning Marcus and his money to cover a massive illegal deficit in his own fraudulent accounts before the federal agents finally closed in on him. "You are lying!" Tasha screamed, her voice cracking as her polished facade shattered entirely. "Brent would never steal from his own family. He is protecting us. He is using your brother as a meat shield." I shot back, my voice finally rising to fill the vast room. I turned the monitors so both women could see them clearly. I double-clicked the final and most damning piece of evidence, a file named Duyen Mao 4_10.docx. Marcus genuinely thought he was merely setting up a high-yield offshore account. He never read the fine print. Buried clearly on the final page of that heavy legal contract Brent gave him was an unconditional personal guarantee. Marcus officially signed his name as the primary personal guarantor for a $15 million commercial debt belonging to a shell corporation owned entirely by Brent. The silence in the office was absolute. The only sound was the hum of the central air conditioning and the rapid, shallow breathing of the two women standing before me. When Brent defaults on that toxic loan and the FBI ensures that he will, I explained, lowering my voice to a lethal whisper. The creditors will not go after Brent. They will come straight for Marcus. They will seize his bank accounts, garnish his executive wages, and liquidate every single asset attached to the Williams name. Your precious family legacy is completely eradicated. Valerie gripped the edge of my mahogany desk, her knuckles turning stark white. Her breath hitched in her throat as she struggled to comprehend the magnitude of the ruin I had just laid out before her. But Marcus is a vice president, she stammered, her voice trembling with raw panic. He transferred his own bonuses. He has the money to fight this. He transferred nothing of the sort, I replied, delivering the final fatal blow. The account Marcus drained yesterday was not our joint personal savings. It was a dedicated corporate tax holding account for MCOR. It contained federal tax reserves meant directly for the Internal Revenue Service. I watched the realization hit them like a freight train. I did not lock your supplemental credit card, Valerie. The federal government did. Marcus committed wire fraud and federal embezzlement using a traceable IP address. I have already revoked his proxy authorizations, locked the corporate accounts, and notified the authorities of the hostile breach. Your son is currently operating on borrowed time, and your son-in-law is dragging your entire family down with him. Tasha was hyperventilating, her hands desperately clutching her own arms as if to keep herself from falling apart. Brent told me everything was handled. She muttered, tears of pure terror welling in her eyes. He told me we were untouchable. Nobody is untouchable, Tasha, I said smoothly, especially not arrogant people who refuse to read the fine print. I pressed the silver intercom button on my desk. Security. Please escort these two unauthorized individuals out of the building. If they resist, call the local authorities and have them cited for criminal trespassing. Valerie tried to speak, tried to summon the aristocratic rage she had used to terrorize me for nearly a decade, but her voice completely failed her. Two massive security guards stepped into the office, their expressions stern and uncompromising. "Let us go, ladies," the lead guard instructed, gesturing toward the heavy glass doors. Tasha grabbed her mother by the arm, pulling her toward the exit like a frightened child fleeing a burning building. They stumbled out of my corporate sanctuary, stripped of their power, their pride, and their completely unearned sense of superiority. I watched them go in absolute silence, savoring the profound peace that washed over the room the moment the doors clicked shut. The war had officially escalated, and the opposing generals had just realized they were fighting without any ammunition. I poured myself a cup of black coffee from the carafe on my credenza, the rich, bitter aroma grounding me in the present moment. But I knew the battle was far from over. Chloe still believed she was the triumphant queen, completely oblivious to the fact that her newly conquered kingdom was built entirely on a foundation of quicksand. My cell phone vibrated violently against the desk. It was an incoming call from a number I did not immediately recognize, but the area code belonged to the elite gated community of Beacon Hill, the very neighborhood where my $2 million mansion sat, the mansion Marcus had falsely promised to his pregnant mistress. I accepted the call, pressing the phone to my ear. Maya Wilson, a gruff, authoritative voice asked through the speaker. "This is Sergeant Miller with the Atlanta Police Department. We are currently responding to a disturbance at the Beacon Hill residence listed under your corporate holding company." "What seems to be the problem, Sergeant?" I asked, my tone perfectly even. "We have a young woman here identifying herself as Chloe," he explained. "She arrived with a team of independent contractors and attempted to force entry into the property to begin unapproved demolition work. When the automated security system locked the perimeter, she became hostile. She is currently claiming that her fiancé, a Marcus Williams, is the legal owner of the estate and gave her full authorization to alter the premises." I smiled, a deep warmth spreading through my chest as I looked out over the city skyline. "Sergeant Miller," I said clearly, "Marcus Williams does not own a single brick of that property. He is not on the deed, he holds no financial equity, and his access credentials were officially revoked yesterday evening. The estate is owned entirely by MCOR Crisis Management." There was a brief pause on the line, followed by the sound of muffled shouting in the background. I could faintly hear Chloe screaming about her rights as the mother of the new heir. "Understood, ma'am," Sergeant Miller replied, his voice hardening with professional resolve. "The individual is trespassing on private corporate property. Would you like to press formal charges?" I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch out just long enough to seal her fate. "Absolutely, Sergeant. Arrest her, and please make sure she understands exactly whose property she is trying to vandalize." I placed the phone face down on the polished mahogany surface of my desk. A profound, icy calm washed over me. Sergeant Miller was currently reading Chloe her rights on the front lawn of the $2 million Beacon Hill estate she mistakenly thought she was about to renovate. The first domino had officially fallen, and the satisfying crash was echoing perfectly according to my design. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee, savoring the bitter warmth. Less than 15 minutes later, the heavy soundproof glass doors of my executive suite were violently shoved open, shattering the quiet sanctuary of my office. My assistant Sarah stood helplessly in the doorway, her face flushed with panic as she tried to block the intruders. I raised a single hand, signaling for Sarah to step down. I knew exactly who had breached the perimeter, and I was entirely prepared for them. My mother-in-law, Valerie, marched into the center of the room like a conquering general who had completely misread the map of the battlefield. She was flanked by her daughter, Tasha. Both women radiated the frantic, aggressive energy of people whose unearned privilege had just been unceremoniously interrupted. Valerie was dressed in her signature tailored Chanel silk suit, clutching a designer handbag that cost more than most people earned in a year. Her face was twisted into a mask of manufactured aristocratic outrage. "How dare you humiliate me at the country club?" Valerie hissed, slamming her manicured hands flat onto my desk. Her diamond rings clattered sharply against the wood. My platinum supplemental credit card was just declined in front of the entire charity luncheon committee. "I know exactly what you are doing, Maya. You think you can throw a petty, vindictive tantrum just because my son finally came to his senses and left you." Tasha stepped up beside her mother, crossing her arms and jutting out her chin. "You need to accept reality, Maya. Chloe is young. She knows how to listen. And most importantly, she is giving this family a male heir. That is something you could never do, no matter how much of my brother and his money you wasted trying. Marcus taking that cash was his rightful reward for enduring years of your boring, barren company. Do not embarrass yourself by trying to cut off our accounts." The cruelty in Tasha and her voice was entirely predictable. They had always operated on the assumption that my silence was a symptom of weakness. They truly believed that because I lacked a pretentious family pedigree, I would simply absorb their abuse and quietly disappear into the background. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I did not even stand up. I simply leaned back in my high-backed leather chair and let the silence stretch out, heavy and suffocating. The physical distance between my massive desk and the two women standing before me seemed to expand, creating a stark visual divide that perfectly mirrored the shifting power dynamic. "Do you really want to talk about endurance, Valerie?" I asked, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly soft register that instantly commanded the room. I reached down and opened the bottom drawer of my desk. My fingers brushed against the thick, heavy manila folder I had kept hidden for the past 2 years. I pulled it out and tossed it onto the center of the desk. It landed with a loud, satisfying thud that made Tasha flinch. "Open it," I commanded. Valerie glared at me, her chest heaving, but she snatched the folder. She flipped it open, and as her eyes scanned the top document, the color instantly drained from her perfectly powdered face. Her arrogant posture crumbled, replaced by a sudden rigid tension. "Those are the medical bills from my 4 rounds of in vitro fertilization," I stated clearly, enunciating every syllable so they would strike like physical blows. $60,000 of accumulated debt. Do you remember those days, Valerie? You sat in my living room on that velvet sofa, holding my hands and crying fake manipulative tears. You begged me to endure the process. You begged me to give you a grandson to carry on the precious Williams legacy. Valerie opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. I stood up slowly, planting my hands on the desk and leaning forward, forcing her to step back. 4 times I continued, my voice steady but laced with absolute venom. 4 times you forced me to inject my body with aggressive hormones until I was physically exhausted and emotionally shattered. You promised in front of witnesses that the Williams Family Trust would cover every single medical expense. But the moment the fourth transfer failed, the moment the fertility specialist told you I might never be able to carry a child to term, you canceled the bank drafts. You stopped taking my calls. You left me to pay off a massive $60,000 medical debt completely alone while you sat at your precious country club luncheons and whispered to your friends that I was a defective, barren woman. Tasha swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously toward the door. That was a family matter, she stammered, attempting to regain some ground. You cannot hold that against us now. Marcus had every right to secure his financial future. I shifted my gaze to Tasha, letting a cold, humorless smile touch my lips. I did not lock your supplemental credit card, Valerie. Valerie blinked, genuine confusion replacing her anger. What are you talking about? I tried to run the card 3 times. The bank said the primary account holder was flagged. I stepped around the desk, closing the distance between us. The bank locked it. The federal government locked it. Because your brilliant, arrogant son did not steal our joint personal savings yesterday. He completely drained a corporate tax holding account belonging exclusively to my firm. He stole federal tax reserves meant for the Internal Revenue Service. Valerie stumbled backward, her hand flying to her throat as if she could physically hold back the panic. You are lying. Marcus is a senior vice president. He knows exactly what he is doing. He transferred his own bonuses. He committed wire fraud and federal embezzlement using a traceable IP address right here in Atlanta. I corrected her, my tone merciless. He triggered an automatic federal fraud alert. The bank immediately locked his profile, and by extension, they froze every single financial account connected to his name, his social security number, and his dependents. That includes the generous monthly allowance he funnels into your checking account and the platinum credit card you just tried to use. Tasha grabbed her mother and her arm, her eyes wide with terror. Mom, if Marcus is flagged for federal fraud, Brent and his brokerage accounts could be audited by association. We need to call Brent right now. I laughed, a sharp, biting sound that echoed off the glass walls. Brent cannot help you, Tasha. Brent is currently drowning in a $15 million toxic commercial debt. And the best part, he tricked your brother into signing an unconditional personal guarantee for the entire amount. When Brent defaults, the creditors will not seize his assets. They will come straight for Marcus. Your entire family legacy is currently evaporating as we speak. Valerie let out a choked, breathless gasp. She looked as though the floor had suddenly dropped out from beneath her. You orchestrated this. You set him up. I simply watched him dig his own grave, I replied coldly, and now I am going to bury him in it. I turned away from them and pressed the intercom button on my desk. Security, please escort these 2 uninvited guests out of my building immediately. Tasha tried to shout something, a desperate, unintelligible threat, but the heavy glass doors opened instantly. 2 massive security guards wearing impeccably tailored black suits stepped into the office. Their expressions were stern and entirely uncompromising. Time to leave, ladies, the lead guard instructed, gesturing firmly toward the exit. Valerie attempted to stand tall, attempting to summon the aristocratic dignity she had used to terrorize me for nearly a decade, but her hands were shaking violently. Tasha grabbed her mother by the elbow, practically dragging her toward the door, like a frightened child fleeing a collapsing building. I stood perfectly still, watching the absolute destruction of their pride. The security guards flanked them, ensuring they moved swiftly down the corridor toward the elevators. I remained standing until the doors clicked shut, sealing my office in profound, triumphant silence. The toxic influence of the Williams family had been officially purged from my professional sanctuary. They had walked in expecting to demand my surrender, and they had walked out realizing they were completely bankrupt. I returned to my desk and picked up my phone. The screen was already flashing with a dozen missed calls from Marcus. He was undoubtedly standing in the lobby of a luxury hotel trying to book a bridal suite for Chloe, only to find his black card repeatedly declined. I watched his name flash on the screen for a full minute, letting him sweat, letting the sheer, unadulterated panic set into his bones before I finally swiped to accept the call. Maya! Marcus barked into the receiver, his voice tight, erratic, and completely stripped of the smug superiority he had paraded yesterday. Maya, what the hell is going on? Why are all my accounts frozen? Why is the bank telling me there is a federal hold on my social security number? Fix this right now. I sat down in my leather chair, leaning back and resting my feet on the edge of the mahogany desk. Hello, Marcus, I said pleasantly. How is the new perfect life treating you? Stop playing games with me! Marcus shouted, the sound of honking cars in the background indicating he was standing on a busy street. You called your banker friends, did you not? You threw a hysterical fit and had them temporarily freeze the transfers. Call them back and release the funds immediately, or I swear to God I will have my lawyers drain you dry in the divorce settlement. You do not have any lawyers, Marcus, I replied, my voice dropping to a low, soothing purr. Because lawyers require retainers, and you currently do not possess a single liquid asset to your name. What are you talking about? I transferred $1.2 million yesterday. It is sitting in the Cayman Trust. Brent guaranteed it. I closed my eyes, savoring the moment. I want you to listen to me very carefully, Marcus. That account you drained yesterday, the one you assumed held your banking bonuses, that was the MCOR Federal Tax Reserve. You transferred government funds without authorization. You committed federal embezzlement. The bank did not freeze your accounts because of a divorce dispute. They froze your accounts because you are currently under investigation for corporate wire fraud. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. I could practically hear his heart stopping. That is impossible, he finally whispered, his voice trembling. You gave me proxy access. You authorized me. I gave you limited vendor transfer access for a 2-week period last quarter, I corrected him. You used an outdated digital token to siphon corporate tax reserves. I have already submitted the IP logs to the federal authorities. They know the transaction originated from your personal laptop. Maya, please. Marcus stammered, the realization crashing down on him. You have to tell them it was a mistake. Tell them it was a marital misunderstanding. If the bank reports this to the SEC, my career is over. I will lose my license. I will go to federal prison. You should have thought about your career before you tried to rob me to fund your pregnant mistress, I said coldly. Speaking of Chloe, have you spoken to her in the last hour? What did you do to Chloe? He demanded, a sudden surge of protective anger breaking through his panic. I did not do anything to her, I replied innocently, but the Atlanta Police Department just arrested her for criminal trespassing and attempted vandalism. Arrested her. She was at our house in Beacon Hill. She had every right to be there. I gave her the keys. You gave her the keys to a house you do not own, Marcus. I purchased the Beacon Hill estate entirely in cash 3 years ago. I placed the deed exclusively under a subsidiary holding company owned by MCOR. You are just a glorified tenant who pays the property taxes. When Chloe showed up with a demolition crew and tried to smash my marble countertops, the security system locked her in, and the police dragged her out in handcuffs. Marcus let out a strangled, breathless sound. He was suffocating under the weight of his own arrogance. Maya, I am begging you. Call the police. Drop the charges against Chloe. She is pregnant. You cannot let them lock her up. I will do whatever you want. I will sign whatever you need me to sign. Just release the funds and let her go. I let his desperate pleas wash over me, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, clinical satisfaction. You already signed exactly what I needed you to sign, Marcus, I said, my voice hardening into steel. 6 months ago, when Brent handed you that offshore investment contract, did you bother to read page 42? Did you read the fine print before you handed him your financial soul? What are you talking about? Brent is my brother-in-law. He is protecting my assets. Brent is protecting himself from a federal indictment, I shot back. He used your $1.2 million to temporarily appease his angry investors. And in exchange, you blindly signed an unconditional personal guarantee for his $15 million toxic commercial debt. No, Marcus gasped, his voice cracking. No, that is not true. Brent would never do that to me. Call him and ask him yourself, I suggested smoothly. Oh, wait, you cannot. Because the FBI raided his boutique brokerage firm early this morning. When his shell corporation officially defaults by the end of the week, his creditors are coming straight for you. They will garnish your non-existent wages, they will seize your frozen bank accounts, and they will completely obliterate the Williams family legacy you are so fiercely proud of. Maya, please, you have to help me. I am your husband. You threw your wedding ring on my kitchen floor yesterday, Marcus. You told me to enjoy my empty life. I am just following your instructions. I disconnected the call and blocked his number. I stood up from my desk, walking over to the expansive windows overlooking the city. The sun was shining brightly over Atlanta. The air in my office felt clean, crisp, and entirely my own. The war was over, and I had not just won. I had systematically dismantled every single pillar of their toxic existence. My cell phone chimed. It was a text message from Sergeant Miller containing a singular, beautiful image. It was a mugshot of Chloe. Her mascara smeared her designer dress wrinkled, holding a placard with her booking number. I smiled, turning back to my desk to begin my workday. The crisis was officially managed. That evening, the air inside L'Amour Atlanta and its most exclusive French dining establishment was thick with the scent of roasted garlic, expensive truffles, and desperate denial. Valerie had specifically demanded the private dining room at the back of the restaurant. She needed an audience. She needed the other elite patrons to see her holding court, projecting an image of absolute unshakable control, even as the foundation of her family empire had already begun to silently fracture. Chloe made her grand entrance wearing a skin-tight blush pink designer dress that was entirely inappropriate for a formal family dinner, yet perfectly calculated to emphasize her slightly rounded stomach. She clung to Marcus, and his arm leaning her entire body weight against him, perfectly executing the role of the fragile, dependent damsel. She fluttered her eyelashes and kept her voice breathy and light, playing the exact opposite of the strong, independent woman Marcus had just betrayed. Valerie beamed as they took their seats. She tapped her heavy silver spoon against her crystal champagne flute, demanding the attention of everyone at the table. Tasha sat to her left, aggressively downing her second glass of wine, desperately trying to ignore the fact that her husband Brent had not answered his phone all day. "I want to propose a toast," Valerie announced, her voice pitched just loud enough to ensure the waitstaff and the tables nearest to their private room could hear her. She stood up, smoothing the front of her immaculate Chanel jacket. "To welcome Chloe properly into our family. A real woman understands her biological duty. A real woman knows how to bring glory, legacy, and a male heir to a bloodline, rather than wasting her prime years chasing masculine ambitions in an office. We are finally washing away the bitter, barren mistakes of the past." Chloe blushed deeply, casting her eyes downward in a display of manufactured modesty, while resting a manicured hand protectively over her stomach. "Thank you so much, Mother Valerie," Chloe murmured, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "You have all been so incredibly welcoming to me today. I am just so excited for our future together. In fact, tomorrow morning I am taking my private contractor straight to the Beacon Hill estate. That house is structurally fine, but the interior is so hopelessly cold and outdated. I want to rip out all of that depressing dark hardwood. I want to bring sledgehammers to that cheap marble kitchen island. I want to build a bright, massive nursery for our baby. That entire house needs a complete purification to erase any trace of Maya and her terrible taste." Marcus forced a wide, rigid smile that did not quite reach his eyes. He leaned down and kissed Chloe on the forehead. "Whatever you want, baby," he said, his voice straining slightly. "You can change absolutely anything you desire. That house belongs to us now." He raised his glass to join the toast, but his hand trembled violently, sloshing the expensive champagne over the rim. His phone vibrated relentlessly in the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket. It was yet another automated alert from his bank notifying him of a declined transaction. Marcus was sweating profusely under his collar. He knew the FBI had raided Brent and his brokerage firm that morning. He knew his proxy access to my corporate accounts had been severed. He knew his personal black cards were suddenly returning hostile fraud codes. He was sitting at a $2,000 dinner, completely terrified, trapped in a rapidly collapsing lie, and lacking the courage to tell his mother and his pregnant mistress that he was currently destitute. Miles away, cloaked in the quiet darkness of the city, the atmosphere in my downtown legal suite could not have been more different. There was no champagne, there was no forced laughter, there was no desperate clinging to social illusions. There was only the low hum of the ventilation system, the sharp scent of fresh espresso, and the devastating, undeniable reality of ink on paper. I sat across from David, my lead real estate attorney. Spread between us on the polished glass conference table were the original certified property deeds for the Beacon Hill estate. When Marcus and I had first toured that sprawling $2 million property 3 years ago, he had eagerly played the role of the triumphant provider. He wanted the exorbitant price tag to validate his fragile ego. He wanted to parade his banking colleagues through the grand foyer to prove his superiority. But behind his arrogant public facade, his personal credit history was a catastrophic wasteland. He had secretly squandered hundreds of thousands of dollars on failed speculative investments, frantically hiding the massive losses to protect his image from his domineering father and his judgmental mother. When the mortgage broker ran his background check for the estate, the application was instantly flagged and denied. Marcus had sat in his car and wept from the humiliation. To save him from public ruin, I had stepped in. I did not co-sign a loan. I did not attach my personal credit to his sinking ship. I simply utilized a subsidiary holding company directly under the MCOR corporate umbrella and purchased the entire estate outright in cash. The deed was registered exclusively to my corporation. Marcus never owned a single square foot of that property. His only financial contribution was paying the monthly property taxes and the neighborhood homeowner association fees directly from his checking account. That minimal financial responsibility was the pacifier I had shoved into his mouth to quiet his insecurities. It allowed him to boast at his country club mixers that he was the master of his domain. He had lived the lie for so long, surrounded by the expensive walls I had paid for, that he had entirely convinced himself the lie was absolute reality. He genuinely believed he had the legal authority to sign a divorce petition, kick me to the curb, and install his 24-year-old mistress in my premier corporate asset. David slid a heavy bound stack of legal documents across the glass table. "The injunction is ironclad, Maya," he said quietly, tapping the bottom signature line with his gold pen. "The holding company officially revokes any implied tenancy. We have drafted a formal cease and desist alongside a preemptive trespassing order." I picked up the pen. I did not hesitate. I did not feel a shred of pity for the man who had weaponized my fertility struggles against me. I signed my name with sharp, unyielding strokes, sealing the document with binding corporate authority. "I do not want this served to him at his luxury hotel room," I instructed, my voice, stripped of all emotion, vibrating with cold, tactical precision. Chloe made her intentions very clear to her friends on social media this afternoon. She is bringing a private demolition crew to the property tomorrow morning at exactly 8 o'clock. I want the local police precinct waiting for her in the driveway. David raised an eyebrow, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You want to make a public example of her." "I want to enforce the law," I corrected him smoothly. "When she tries to break the perimeter locks, when she tries to order strange men to tear down my walls, I want her arrested for criminal trespassing and attempted destruction of private corporate property. I want her handcuffed on the front lawn." The sheer breathtaking irony of their situation was almost poetic. They were sitting in a high-end French restaurant at that very moment, raising crystal glasses to toast a stolen kingdom, completely unaware that the drawbridge had already been pulled up and the moat filled with alligators. Marcus was sitting there smiling at his pregnant mistress, while the absolute certainty of federal prison and total financial ruin circled him like sharks in bloody water. Valerie was loudly celebrating the glorious continuation of her precious family line, utterly blind to the fact that her golden son had just guaranteed that the Williams name would forever be synonymous with catastrophic fraud and federal indictment. I gathered the signed eviction documents and handed them back to David. Make the call, David, I said, standing up and smoothing the front of my jacket. Let the police know we have a hostile intruder planning to breach the estate at dawn. I walked over to the expansive windows of my legal suite, looking out over the glittering lights of the Atlanta skyline. For 7 years, I had shrunk myself to make Marcus feel tall. I had absorbed Valerie and her insults, ignored Tasha and her jealousy, and quietly funded their illusions of grandeur just to keep the peace. I had played the role of the dutiful, quiet wife while they paraded around on the foundation I had built. That era was officially over. Tomorrow morning, Chloe was going to walk straight into a steel trap. She was going to find out that the palace she thought she had conquered was equipped with a highly sophisticated security system, and she was going to learn the hard way that the rightful owner of the estate was absolutely not interested in taking prisoners. 3, 2, 1. The massive custom oak front doors did not just open. They were breached by 4 uniformed officers of the Atlanta Police Department. Sergeant Miller stepped into the grand foyer, his hand resting casually but firmly on his utility belt. The heavy thud of their tactical boots against my imported Italian marble echoed up the sweeping double staircase. Chloe froze entirely. The manufactured arrogant sneer melted from her face, replaced instantly by genuine wide-eyed confusion. She looked at the police officers, then at her hired contractors, and finally back at me. I remained seated in my velvet armchair, my posture perfectly relaxed, my legs crossed slowly, swirling the remnants of my morning espresso. "Officers, thank God you are finally here!" Chloe exclaimed, pivoting seamlessly into the role of the fragile victim. She clutched her rounded stomach defensively and pointed a long manicured finger directly at my face. "This woman is refusing to leave my property. My fiancé, Marcus Williams, owns this estate. She is his bitter ex-wife, and she is criminally trespassing on our land. Please remove her so we can begin our renovations." Sergeant Miller did not take a single step toward me. He looked down at the official dispatch clipboard in his hand, verified the address, and then looked directly at Chloe. "Ma'am, we received a priority call from the Executive Legal Department of M-Corps Crisis Management regarding a hostile breach of their corporate property. Are you the individual identifying herself as Chloe Jenkins?" "I am going to be Chloe Williams," she corrected him, lifting her chin with a defiant, entitled toss of her blonde extensions. "And Marcus gave me the security keys. He pays the property taxes. He explicitly told me I could demolish this depressing living room today. These men are here to work for us." The lead contractor, a burly man wearing a neon high-visibility vest, immediately stepped backward, raising both of his rough hands in the air in a gesture of absolute surrender. "We do not want any trouble whatsoever, officer. The young lady hired us online. We have not touched a single wall. We have not swung a single hammer. We are leaving right now." He sharply signaled to his crew, and the 3 men practically sprinted out the open front door, completely abandoning Chloe in the center of the vast foyer. "Cowards!" Chloe hissed at their retreating backs. She turned back to the sergeant, aggressively digging into her designer handbag to pull out her cell phone. "You are making a massive career-ending mistake, officer. Marcus is a senior vice president at a major financial firm. When I call him, he is going to have your badge for this disrespect. He is going to explain that this is our house and our kingdom." I finally stood up. The sharp click of my designer heels against the marble floor rang out like a metronome, ticking down her final moments of dignity. I walked slowly, deliberately toward her, closing the distance until I was standing just a few feet away, invading her personal space. "Call him Chloe," I commanded softly. "Put him on speakerphone. Let us all hear exactly what the senior vice president has to say to the police." Chloe glared at me, her eyes flashing with pure, unfiltered hatred. She unlocked her phone screen and dialed his number, jabbing the speaker button and holding the device out in the space between us like a protective shield. The phone rang once. It rang twice. It rang 3 times. "He is probably in an important high-level executive meeting," Chloe sneered desperately, trying to mask her mounting anxiety with false bravado. "He is probably hyperventilating in a cheap hotel lobby," I corrected her smoothly. On the 4th ring, the line clicked open. "Chloe, what is it? I told you not to call me right now." Marcus sounded frantic, entirely out of breath, and completely stripped of his usual polished, arrogant swagger. Marcus, baby. Chloe cooed, her voice instantly dropping an octave to sound helpless, sweet, and entirely dependent. There is a huge misunderstanding at our house. Maya is still here, and she actually had the nerve to call the police on me. Tell these officers that you own this estate. Tell them to arrest her so my contractors can get back to work on our beautiful nursery. A dead, suffocating silence filled the speakerphone. I watched closely as Chloe and her confident smile began to violently waver. Marcus, she prompted, her voice rising in pitch, cracking slightly at the edges. Tell them. Chloe, Marcus croaked, his voice breaking into a pathetic whine. Get out of that house immediately. Chloe blinked rapidly, stepping back as if she had been physically struck across the face. What? No, baby, you promised me. You promised me this house. You said we were going to tear out her ugly dark floors. You said the Williams family legacy deserved this mansion. I do not own it, Marcus shouted, the raw, unfiltered panic finally bleeding through the speaker for the police and everyone else in the room to hear. I never owned it. Maya owns it. Her corporation owns every single brick of it. You need to leave right now before she presses federal charges against both of us. But you said you transferred the money. Chloe shrieked, the sweet, dependent facade entirely gone, replaced by the shrill, terrifying desperation of a woman realizing her meal ticket was violently bouncing. You said you put $1.2 million into a secure offshore trust for us. You told your mother we were untouchable. I took a calculated step closer to the phone. Tell her about the money, Marcus. I said, my voice echoing clearly and coldly into the receiver. Tell her exactly where that $1.2 million came from yesterday. Tell her about the federal corporate tax account you illegally drained. Maya. Please shut up, Marcus begged, sobbing openly, now his dignity entirely reduced to ashes. Chloe, just get out of there. The feds are freezing all of my accounts. Brent lied to me. He used my transfer to cover his own fraudulent commercial loan. I have absolutely nothing left. Do not make this any worse than it already is. I reached out with one finger and tapped the red button on Chloe and her screen, instantly ending the call. The silence in the grand foyer returned thicker, heavier, and far more absolute than before. I looked at Chloe. The absolute soul-crushing devastation on her face was a masterpiece. I watched her process the lie she built her entire future on, the lie Marcus sold her to get her into his bed, the lie Valerie championed to secure her precious male heir. Chloe had traded her youth, her reputation, and her dignity to become the pampered mistress of a wealthy, powerful executive, only to discover she had permanently hitched her wagon to a broke, soon-to-be indicted federal felon. The realization washed over her in brutal, unforgiving waves. She looked frantically around the $2 million foyer, staring at the crystal chandeliers, the sweeping staircase, knowing with terrifying certainty that she would never own a single inch of it. You knew, Chloe whispered, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped her expensive phone onto the marble. You set him up. You let him think he had all that money just so you could take it all away and humiliate him. I did not have to set Marcus up, I replied, my tone clinical, detached, and entirely devoid of mercy. Marcus destroyed himself. He destroyed himself with his own greed, his own staggering arrogance, and his own endless lies. He lied to you, Chloe. He lied to his mother. He lied to his colleagues. He built an entire existence on a fragile foundation of deceit. I simply decided it was time to turn on the blinding lights and let everyone see the rot. I turned to Sergeant Miller, who had been watching the entire exchange with commendable professional stoicism. Sergeant, as you can clearly see, this woman has zero legal right to be standing on MCOR corporate property. She arrived with an unauthorized demolition crew intending to cause massive structural damage to my assets. I want her removed immediately, and I want formal charges filed for criminal trespassing. Sergeant Miller nodded sharply, stepping forward and pulling a pair of heavy metal handcuffs from his utility belt. Ma'am, please turn around and place your hands behind your back. Chloe completely snapped. The very last shred of her sanity vanished into the cold morning air. She lunged forward, raising her hands like claws to scratch at my face, screaming vile obscenities that echoed loudly off the high ceiling. "You barren witch! You ruined everything! You ruined my baby and his life!" She never reached me. The two robust officers flanking Sergeant Miller intercepted her instantly, grabbing her flailing arms and twisting them firmly but professionally behind her back. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs snapping shut was the most satisfying musical sound I had heard all year. "Chloe Jenkins, you are under formal arrest for criminal trespassing and attempted vandalism." Sergeant Miller recited, his voice calm and steady over her frantic, breathless screaming. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." They marched her aggressively toward the heavy oak doors. She dragged her feet, kicking and struggling uselessly, her tight designer dress bunching up awkwardly around her thighs, exposing her complete lack of grace. She looked back at me over her shoulder, dark tears streaming down her face, her expensive mascara running in ugly, jagged rivers across her cheeks. "Marcus will fix this," she screamed desperately, her voice cracking. "He will bail me out. You will pay for this, Maya." "Marcus cannot even afford to buy himself a cup of cheap coffee this morning." "Chloe," I called out after her, my voice carrying out onto the front porch. "Good luck waiting for that phantom bail money." The heavy oak doors closed firmly behind them, completely cutting off her pathetic screams. The massive house fell into a state of profound, absolute silence. I stood entirely alone in the grand foyer of the home I had purchased with my own blood, my own sweat, and my own tireless corporate strategy. The home I had foolishly allowed to be infected by the toxic, parasitic presence of the Williams family for far too long. I walked slowly, methodically through the ground floor, running my fingers over the pristine, dark hardwood floors Chloe had so desperately wanted to rip apart. I walked past the gleaming marble kitchen island she had wanted to smash with sledgehammers. Every single inch of this magnificent estate was mine. Every piece of custom furniture, every imported light fixture, every single tangible asset was legally, bindingly, and undeniably protected. For 7 long years, I had tolerated their blatant disrespect. I had tolerated Valerie and her constant cutting remarks about my foster care background. I had tolerated Tasha and her transparent, bitter jealousy. I had tolerated Marcus and his staggering financial incompetence, feeding his endless need to inflate his fragile ego at my direct expense. I had convinced myself that keeping the peace was more noble than protecting my own peace. I had allowed them to consistently minimize my massive success, while I quietly funded their unearned aristocratic privilege. But standing in the quiet, beautiful aftermath of the storm, I realized the absolute truth. Keeping the peace with toxic people only guarantees that you will remain in a constant, exhausting state of internal war. I was done negotiating with emotional terrorists. I was done shrinking myself to fit into their narrow, pathetic worldview. My phone buzzed sharply in my pocket. It was a priority text message from David, my lead real estate attorney. "The criminal trespassing charges have been formally processed. Chloe is currently sitting in a holding cell at the downtown precinct. I have also successfully initiated the secondary protocol regarding Brent and his brokerage firm. The federal agents have officially seized all his physical and digital assets." I typed back a single definitive word: excellent. The corporate and personal purge was nearly complete. The Williams family had spent years deliberately trying to break my spirit, assuming I would simply bend and fracture under their collective oppressive weight. They had vastly underestimated the structural integrity of the woman they were dealing with. I did not bend. I did not break. I simply calculated the exact amount of pressure needed to shatter their entire fabricated world, and then I applied it without a single ounce of mercy. I walked back to my velvet armchair, picked up my now lukewarm espresso, and took a final victorious sip. I needed to get dressed for the executive office. I had a multi-million-dollar corporation to run, an international empire to expand, and a brand new, completely unrestricted life to begin. The sprawling house felt significantly lighter. The circulated air felt infinitely cleaner. The sweet, intoxicating scent of absolute, unquestionable victory lingered permanently in every single room. 3, 2, 1. The piercing, unmistakable wail of police sirens shattered the pristine morning tranquility of the Beacon Hill estate. The flashing blue and red lights violently strobed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting harsh, chaotic shadows across the imported Italian marble of the grand foyer. The heavy custom oak front doors swung open with absolute authority. Two uniformed officers of the Atlanta Police Department marched into my home, their hands resting instinctively on their utility belts. Flanking them was David, my lead real estate attorney, his expression as sharp and unyielding as the pressed lapels of his tailored suit. Chloe stumbled backward, her designer heels slipping slightly on the polished floor. The smug, victorious sneer she had worn just seconds prior evaporated instantly, replaced by a mask of frantic, wide-eyed panic. She instinctively wrapped both arms around her slightly rounded stomach, falling back on her practiced routine of playing the fragile, defenseless victim. "What is going on?" Chloe demanded, her voice jumping a full octave into a shrill, breathless register. She pointed a trembling finger toward David and the officers. "This is a private residence. This is my husband and his house. You have no right to be here. We are conducting scheduled renovations." The officers did not spare her a single glance of sympathy. They looked directly past her, their eyes locking onto me. I remained perfectly still in my velvet armchair, my legs crossed, projecting the absolute unshakable calm of a woman who had meticulously orchestrated every single second of this encounter. From the officers and their perspective looking up at me seated on the slightly elevated landing of the living room, I knew I radiated pure, untouchable authority. "Ma'am," the lead officer said, addressing me with respectful professionalism, "we received a priority dispatch regarding a hostile intrusion and attempted vandalism at this corporate property." I nodded slowly, rising from my chair with deliberate, measured grace. I walked down the two short steps into the foyer, my gaze fixed firmly on the officers, completely ignoring Chloe and her frantic hyperventilating. "That is correct, officer," I replied, my voice cool and clear. "These individuals have breached the perimeter of a secured corporate asset. They arrived with heavy demolition equipment and explicit intent to destroy private property." Chloe let out a harsh, hysterical laugh, stepping forward, as if she could physically block the reality of the situation. "You are completely insane, Maya. Tell them," she demanded, turning to the bewildered crew of contractors standing awkwardly with their sledgehammers. "Tell them Marcus Williams hired you. Tell them he owns this estate." David stepped forward, opening his leather briefcase with a sharp, decisive click. He pulled out a thick stack of documents bound in heavy legal covers and handed them directly to the lead officer. "Officers, my client is the sole executive president of MCOR Crisis Management." David stated, his voice resonating with absolute legal certainty. "What you are holding is the certified, notarized original deed to this $2 million property. As you can clearly see, the estate is owned entirely and exclusively by the MCOR Corporate Holding Company. Marcus Williams has absolutely no ownership stake, no financial equity, and no legal authority over this premises." The officer reviewed the documents carefully, his eyes scanning the seals and signatures. He nodded, satisfied, and turned his attention back to Chloe and her crew. "Marcus never owned a single brick of this house," I explained, looking directly into Chloe and her terrified eyes for the first time. "He was nothing more than a glorified tenant. He was permitted to pay the monthly neighborhood maintenance fees and the property taxes from his personal checking account. That was the extent of his involvement. He did not have the authority to invite you here, and he certainly did not have the authority to order the destruction of my walls." The color completely drained from Chloe and her face. She looked like she was going to be physically sick. The arrogant, triumphant mistress who had stood in this very foyer just minutes ago, ordering the erasure of my existence, was entirely gone. In her place was a young, foolish girl who had just realized she had built her entire future on the word of a chronic, pathological liar. "No, that is impossible," Chloe stammered, her voice shaking violently. "He promised me. He told his mother this was our house. He told everyone." She desperately dug into her oversized designer handbag, her hands trembling so badly she nearly dropped her phone onto the marble floor. She unlocked the screen and frantically dialed Marcus and his number, pressing the phone tightly against her ear. The silence in the foyer was absolute, amplifying the sound of the line ringing through the tiny speaker. It rang once, it rang twice, it rang 3 times. Then the automated carrier message kicked in loudly, informing her that the number she was trying to reach was currently unavailable. Marcus was unreachable. He was likely sitting in a cheap hotel room or a lawyer, and his waiting area stripped of his proxy access. His bank accounts frozen by the federal government, frantically trying to save himself from an impending embezzlement indictment. He had completely abandoned her, leaving her to face the legal consequences of his massive, fragile ego. Chloe pulled the phone away from her ear, staring at the blank screen as if it had betrayed her. She dialed again, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Straight to voicemail. "He is not going to answer, Chloe," I said softly, the quiet cruelty of the truth cutting through the room. "He has no money. He has no house. And he has absolutely no way to protect you from what is about to happen." The lead officer signaled to his partner. They moved swiftly and efficiently. Before the contractors could even attempt to explain their presence, the officers ordered them to drop their tools. The heavy thud of sledgehammers and crowbars hitting the floor echoed loudly. The officers firmly secured the hands of the lead contractor and his crew behind their backs, the sharp metallic clicks of the steel handcuffs snapping shut, ringing out like a judge and his gavel. The lead officer then turned his attention to Chloe. She backed away, hitting the edge of the marble kitchen island she had so desperately wanted to smash. "Ma'am," the officer said, his voice entirely devoid of sympathy. "You are trespassing on private corporate property. You arrived with unauthorized personnel and demolition equipment with the stated intent to destroy the premises. I need you to place your hands behind your back. You are coming down to the precinct for processing." Chloe completely broke down. The carefully constructed facade of the sophisticated high society expectant mother shattered into a million pathetic pieces. She began to sob uncontrollably, thick, dark tears of pure terror ruining her immaculate makeup. "Please, you cannot do this," she wept, holding her hands up in a desperate, pleading gesture. "I am pregnant. You cannot put me in handcuffs. I did not know. Marcus told me it was his house. He lied to me. Maya, please tell them I did not know." I stood perfectly still, watching her unravel. I remembered the sheer agony of my own fertility struggles. I remembered the endless, brutal hormone injections, the devastating miscarriages, and the agonizing silence of the nursery upstairs. I remembered the absolute lack of mercy Marcus, Valerie, and Tasha had shown me when my body failed to produce their precious heir. They had treated me like disposable garbage. Chloe had gleefully participated in my intended destruction, entirely willing to step over my broken life to claim her prize. "Ignorance is not a valid legal defense for criminal trespassing and attempted vandalism," David stated coldly, stepping forward to shield me from her frantic pleading. "Officers, please proceed." The officer grabbed Chloe by the arm, turning her around and firmly securing her wrists in the handcuffs. She cried out a pathetic, broken sound as the cold steel locked around her skin. "You are making a mistake!" Chloe wailed, her voice echoing shrilly off the high ceilings as the officer began reading her Miranda rights. "Marcus will fix this. He will hire the best lawyers in Atlanta. He will destroy you for this, Maya." I took a slow, measured step toward her as the officer guided her toward the front door. "Marcus cannot afford a public defender right now, let alone a premium legal team," I said, my voice steady and completely empty of compassion. "He used corporate tax funds to pay for your lavish, welcoming dinner last night. The federal government is currently freezing every single asset attached to his name. You hitched your wagon to a fraud, Chloe, and now you get to share the consequences." I watched in absolute, unbroken silence as they marched her out the front door and down the sweeping driveway. The bright morning sun illuminated the tear streaks running down her face and the utter, profound humiliation radiating from her entire body. The police officers firmly guided her into the back of the waiting cruiser, shutting the heavy door and trapping her inside. The police vehicles pulled away, their sirens silenced, leaving the Beacon Hill estate in perfect, immaculate peace. The grand foyer was empty once again, save for David and me. I looked around at the pristine marble, the sweeping staircase, and the elegant, untouched walls. The toxic infection that had threatened to destroy my sanctuary had been surgically permanently removed. That went exactly according to protocol, David noted, quietly adjusting his tie. The security footage of her attempting to order the demolition will make the prosecution an absolute certainty. I nodded, turning my attention back to the massive front windows. The first phase of my retribution was complete. Valerie and Tasha had been humiliated and banished from my corporate headquarters. Chloe had been publicly arrested and stripped of her delusions of grandeur. But the true architect of my misery, the man who had happily fed me to the wolves while stealing my money to build a new life, had yet to fully comprehend the magnitude of his destruction. Marcus thought he was merely facing a banking error. He thought he could lie his way out of federal embezzlement. He had absolutely no idea that I had spent the last 72 hours meticulously burning every single bridge, dismantling every single safety net, and ensuring that when he finally fell, there would be absolutely nothing left to catch him. File the emergency divorce petition immediately. I instructed David, my eyes fixed on the horizon. Do not ask for mediation. Do not offer a settlement. I want every single corporate asset frozen, and I want his absolute total financial ruin put on the public record. David smiled, snapping his briefcase shut. It will be filed before noon. I walked slowly up the grand staircase, my hand trailing lightly along the polished mahogany banister. The house was mine. The corporation was mine. My life was finally unequivocally mine. The sweet, perfect taste of absolute vengeance was just beginning to settle on my tongue, and I fully intended to savor every last drop. Let Marcus run. Let him panic. There was nowhere left for him to hide. The rightful queen had reclaimed her throne, and the executioner was already at the door. The air inside the exclusive Ferrari dealership in Buckhead was heavily perfumed with the scent of raw leather, high-octane fuel, and complimentary espresso. Marcus stood in the center of the pristine showroom, running his hand along the sleek, aggressive curve of a custom-ordered SF90 Stradale. He adjusted his silk tie, his chest puffed out with the intoxicating arrogance of a man who believed he had finally outsmarted the entire world. He wanted this car to be the ultimate symbol of his new life. He wanted to park it in the driveway of the Beacon Hill estate, a rolling monument to his newly acquired freedom and wealth. The general manager, a man who had spent the last hour treating Marcus like visiting royalty, approached with a silver tray holding the final purchasing agreements. Marcus did not even bother to read the terms. He pulled his heavy metal black card from his wallet and tossed it casually onto the tray. Put the $1.2 million deposit on that, Marcus ordered, his voice dripping with condescension. And have the vehicle detailed. I am driving it off the lot today. Certainly, Mr. Williams, the manager said, bowing his head slightly as he carried the card to the primary terminal. Marcus turned back to his reflection in the showroom glass, admiring the cut of his suit. He felt untouchable. He had successfully transferred the funds from what he believed was Maya and her vulnerable holding account just 24 hours prior. He had kicked his cold, ambitious wife to the curb, installed a beautiful young woman in a $2 million mansion, and was about to drive away in a supercar. He was the king of Atlanta. A sharp, piercing beep echoed from the financial terminal, slicing through the quiet jazz playing over the showroom speakers. Marcus frowned, his reflection warping as he turned his head. The manager was staring at the computer screen, his obsequious smile faltering. He swiped the heavy metal card a second time. The machine emitted an angry, dissonant tone. The screen flashed a brilliant, unforgiving red. Is there a problem? Marcus asked, his tone hardening with irritation. Mr. Williams, the manager began, his voice dropping to a discreet, uncomfortable whisper. Your card has been declined. Marcus let out a sharp, derisive laugh. That is absolutely impossible. Run it again. Your machine is broken. I have millions of dollars in that account. I assure you, sir, our equipment is functioning perfectly, the manager replied, the deference in his tone rapidly cooling into suspicion. The terminal is returning a highly specific error code. It states that your account has been subjected to a total federal freeze by the authorities. We cannot process this transaction, and I am obligated by dealership policy to retain this card. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. A cold, nauseating dread bloomed in the pit of his stomach. A federal freeze. That phrase did not belong in civil divorce disputes. That phrase belonged to the FBI. "Give me my card back," Marcus demanded, stepping forward aggressively. "You have no right to keep my property." Before the manager could respond, Marcus and his cell phone began to vibrate violently in his breast pocket. He snatched it out, expecting to see a frantic message from his bank. Instead, the caller ID simply read, "Maya." He jabbed the green button, pressing the phone to his ear, his panic instantly converting into irrational, explosive rage. "What the hell did you do to my accounts?" Marcus roared, entirely abandoning his polished public persona. Several wealthy patrons in the showroom turned to stare at him, their expressions filled with quiet judgment. The voice on the other end of the line was as smooth, calm, and terrifyingly gentle as a velvet noose. "I reported a fraudulent transaction." I replied, my words echoing softly in his ear. "But more importantly, Marcus, I need you to listen to me very carefully. The money you transferred yesterday was not our personal savings. It was not a vulnerable corporate slush fund." Marcus stopped breathing. His hand gripped the phone so tightly, his knuckles turned a sickly shade of white. "That specific account was registered as a federal tax holding account for M-Core Crisis Management." I continued enunciating every single syllable with absolute devastating precision. "You did not just steal from your wife. You intercepted and transferred capital earmarked for the Internal Revenue Service. You just committed federal embezzlement, Marcus. Good luck with the investigation." I disconnected the call. Marcus stood frozen in the center of the gleaming showroom, the phone pressed against his cheek, long after the line had gone dead. The world around him seemed to violently tilt on its axis. He could not hear the jazz music anymore. He could not hear the low murmur of the dealership staff. All he could hear was the deafening roar of his entire life collapsing into dust. Embezzlement, federal tax funds. The trap was so breathtakingly simple yet so unimaginably lethal. Maya had known he still possessed legacy proxy access to a specific tier of accounts. She had intentionally moved those federal funds into a vulnerable position, leaving the vault door wide open, knowing his greed and his arrogance would completely blind him to the danger. He had taken the bait without a single second of hesitation. By executing that wire transfer, he had bypassed civil divorce court entirely and walked straight into a federal felony carrying a mandatory prison sentence. "Sir," the manager said, his voice now entirely devoid of any warmth, "I am going to have to ask you to leave the premises immediately. Security is on their way." Marcus did not argue. He could not speak. His throat was constricted by absolute primal terror. He turned and practically sprinted toward the glass exit doors, his polished leather shoes sliding on the showroom floor. He burst out into the sweltering Atlanta heat, gasping for air as if he were drowning. He reached his least luxury sedan, his hands shaking so violently he could barely unlock the door. He threw himself into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut to block out the world. He had to fix this. He had to move the money back. He just needed to reverse the wire transfer before the authorities officially filed the indictment. He frantically pulled up his banking app. The screen loaded for a terrifying 3 seconds before a sterile white box appeared. "Account suspended. Please contact your branch administrator." He hurled his phone against the passenger seat, letting out a raw, guttural scream of absolute despair. He grabbed the phone again, his fingers slipping on the cracked screen, and dialed Brent. Tasha and her husband was the offshore broker who had facilitated the shadow transfer. Brent knew how to move money invisibly. Brent could undo this. The phone rang endlessly, finally clicking over to an automated voicemail. "Brent, pick up the phone," Marcus shouted into the receiver, sweat pouring down his face, soaking his expensive silk collar. "The feds are freezing everything. Maya set us up. Call me back right now or we are both going to prison." He ended the call, his chest heaving. He had no money. His black cards were dead plastic. The $1.2 million was locked in a federal vault. Chloe was currently being arrested at a house he did not own. He was a senior executive at a premier financial institution, and within the next few hours, Federal agents would likely be walking onto his trading floor to publicly escort him out in handcuffs. He needed help. He needed his mother. Valerie had always fixed his mistakes. Valerie had always protected him. He dialed his mother and her number, his breath hitching in his throat. "Marcus, darling." Valerie answered her tone breezy and relaxed. "Tasha and I just finished a wonderful champagne brunch. We were just talking about how beautiful the estate is going to look once Chloe finishes the renovations." "Mom, listen to me," Marcus gasped, his voice cracking entirely. "You have to listen to me." Maya set a trap. "I have nothing." Valerie let out a confused, dismissive little laugh. "Marcus, what are you talking about? Stop being so dramatic. You have the estate. You have the trust fund you secured yesterday." "I do not have the estate," Marcus yelled, tears of sheer panic welling in his eyes. "Maya bought that house under a shell corporation. She owns it all. She just had Chloe arrested by the Atlanta police for trespassing." The line went deathly quiet. Marcus could hear the faint clinking of silverware in the background. "What do you mean she had Chloe arrested?" Valerie demanded, her voice suddenly sharp and dangerous. "Marcus, where is the money? Where is the $1.2 million? I stole it from a federal tax account," Marcus sobbed, pressing his forehead against the steering wheel. "She tricked me. The FBI froze my accounts. They are going to arrest me, Mom. I need you to wire me money for a defense attorney right now. I need cash." "Marcus." Valerie hissed, her tone dropping into a cold, furious whisper that chilled him to the bone. "You told me you legally secured those funds. You told me that girl was an ignorant stepping stone. You promised me you had this under control. I cannot wire you a single dime. If the FBI is tracking your accounts, transferring money to you will make me an accessory to federal tax fraud." "Mom, please," Marcus begged. "Do not contact me again until you have secured legal counsel," Valerie stated coldly, entirely abandoning the golden sun she had worshipped just hours prior. "I will not let you drag the Williams family name into a federal indictment." The call disconnected. Marcus sat in the suffocating heat of his car, utterly abandoned. The protective shield of his family, his wealth, and his arrogance had been entirely stripped away. He was completely alone, staring down the barrel of total ruin. Miles away in the quiet, climate-controlled sanctuary of my legal suite, I watched the digital tracker on my monitor. The federal banking authorities had officially flagged the transfer. The automated alerts were rolling across the screen in beautiful, cascading lines of green text. "It is done," David said quietly, standing behind my chair. "The IRS Fraud Division has officially assumed jurisdiction over his personal accounts. Warrants are being drafted as we speak." I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands neatly in my lap. I had built Marcus up from nothing, and I had just dismantled him into less than nothing. "Draft the final divorce decree, David." I instructed, never taking my eyes off the monitor. "Serve it to him at his corporate office. I want it handed to him right in front of his entire board of directors. Let everyone see exactly what happens when a parasite tries to consume the host." 2 days later, the stifling air inside the cramped temporary rental apartment smelled of stale sweat and impending doom. The camera followed closely over Marcus and his trembling shoulder as he violently tore through a mountain of discarded bank statements and eviction notices strewn across a cheap laminate table. His hands, previously accustomed to holding crystal champagne flutes and grasping the leather steering wheels of luxury sedans, now clutched a thick, terrifying stack of official federal documents. It was an emergency priority subpoena directly from the United States Internal Revenue Service. Marcus stared at the bold, unforgiving black ink printed across the federal seal. The legal jargon was dense, but the ultimate conclusion was agonizingly clear. A total, immediate, and irrevocable asset freeze had been placed on every single financial account tied to his Social Security number. Checking accounts, retirement funds, investment portfolios, even his basic credit lines were entirely locked down under federal mandate. The polished, untouchable facade of the successful senior vice president had completely collapsed, leaving behind a terrified, cornered man facing the absolute certainty of a federal indictment. He swept his arm across the table, sending a cascade of useless papers fluttering to the stained carpet. He was suffocating. He needed an exit. He needed the one man who had engineered the offshore shadow accounts. Marcus snatched his cell phone from the counter, his thumb slipping on the glass as he frantically dialed the number. He pressed the speaker to his ear, his breathing ragged and shallow, pacing the length of the tiny living room like a caged animal. "Brent, pick up the phone, you bastard!" Marcus screamed into the receiver, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and raw panic. "You have to help me transfer that money back right now. The IRS is investigating me." They froze everything. "Call me back immediately." The line yielded nothing but a long, hopeless, mechanical tone. It was the sound of a dead connection, a disconnected number tumbling into the digital void. There was no voicemail prompt. There was no busy signal. There was just an empty, hollow silence that made the blood freeze in his veins. He tried again, then a third time, then a fourth. The result was identical. Desperation eclipsed all rational thought. Marcus grabbed his keys and bolted out the door of the cheap apartment complex. He threw himself into his leased sedan, slamming his foot on the accelerator. He sped blindly through the busy Atlanta streets, ignoring traffic signals and swerving recklessly between lanes. He did not care about the blaring horns or the screeching tires around him. His entire existence had narrowed down to one singular objective. He had to find his brother-in-law. He had to force Brent to unlock the Cayman Trust and return the $1.2 million before the federal agents showed up at his door with handcuffs. He slammed the brakes, skidding into the visitor parking lot of the glittering high-rise commercial building where Brent and his boutique brokerage firm occupied the entire 14th floor. Marcus did not wait for the valet. He left the car running in a fire lane and sprinted through the revolving glass doors, ignoring the protests of the lobby concierge. He slammed his fist against the elevator button, his chest heaving violently. When the polished chrome doors finally parted on the 14th floor, Marcus burst into the reception area, ready to grab Brent by his tailored collar. He stopped dead in his tracks. The expansive glass-walled reception area was completely gutted. The expensive leather waiting chairs were gone. The modern art pieces that used to hang on the pristine white walls had been stripped away, leaving only faded rectangular outlines and exposed drywall anchors. The heavy mahogany receptionist desk was entirely bare, stripped of its computers, its phones, and its high-end floral arrangements. Marcus walked slowly, unsteadily forward, his footsteps echoing hollowly against the bare concrete floors. "Hello," he called out, his voice sounding weak and pathetic in the vast empty space. "Brent, is anyone here?" He pushed open the heavy glass doors leading into the main bullpen area where dozens of junior brokers used to work. It was a ghost town. Desks were overturned. Drawers hung open, entirely emptied of their contents. A few scattered papers and discarded coffee cups littered the floor, the only remnants of a frantic, disorganized mass exodus. The large frosted glass door bearing Brent and his name and the title of managing director stood wide open. Marcus stumbled into the executive office. It was stripped bare. Even the safe embedded in the wall behind where the desk used to sit was hanging wide open and entirely empty. "Can I help you, buddy?" A rough voice echoed from the hallway. Marcus spun around, his heart hammering against his ribs. A building property manager, wearing a gray utility uniform, stood in the doorway holding a clipboard and a ring of heavy keys. "Where is everyone?" Marcus demanded, his voice rising to a frantic shout. "Where is Brent? Where is the brokerage firm?" The property manager offered a dry, unsympathetic laugh, shaking his head as he looked around the abandoned office space. "You are about a day too late, pal. They packed up and vanished in the middle of the night. Did not pay their lease for the last 3 months. The cleaning crew came in this morning and found the place exactly like this." The signs on the front of the building were already unbolted and tossed in the dumpster out back. "That is impossible," Marcus whispered, stepping backward until his shoulders hit the cold glass wall of the office. "They were operating yesterday. Brent executed a major wire transfer for me yesterday morning. He told me he was securing my assets in a Cayman Trust." The property manager crossed his arms, raising a skeptical eyebrow. Look, man, I do not know anything about any wire transfers or any trusts. All I know is that the FBI raided this floor about 2 hours ago. They took whatever digital servers were left behind and spent an hour taking photos of the empty desks. If you gave that guy money, you better call a lawyer because he is in the wind. The property manager turned and walked away, the jangling of his keys fading down the empty corridor. Marcus slid slowly down the glass wall, his legs entirely giving out beneath him until he hit the cold, dusty floor. Absolute suffocating despair tore at his mind, clawing at his sanity. The fragmented pieces of the puzzle suddenly slammed together with terrifying, blinding clarity. Maya had not just set a trap with the corporate tax account. That was only the first layer of his destruction. The secondary layer, the fatal blow, had come from his own family. Brent had known about Marcus and his impending financial disaster. Brent had listened to Marcus complain about the divorce, about wanting to hide assets, about needing a secure offshore haven away from Maya and her corporate lawyers. Brent had eagerly offered to play the loyal brother-in-law, providing the exact routing numbers for the offshore trust. But Brent was already drowning in his own catastrophic debt. He had not paid his commercial lease. His boutique brokerage firm was a failing hollow shell. When Marcus blindly wired the $1.2 million of stolen federal tax money into that account, Brent did not secure it in a trust. He did not hide it for Marcus to use later. Brent took the money, used it to cover his own immediate desperate liabilities, packed up his entire operation in the dead of night, and completely vanished. He had stolen the stolen money. Marcus sat on the floor of the empty office, clutching his knees to his chest, struggling to pull oxygen into his lungs. The sheer, magnificent brutality of the situation broke his mind. He was left holding the bag for a massive multi-million-dollar federal crime. He was the one who had initiated the unauthorized wire transfer from the MCOR corporate accounts. His digital signature and proxy codes were all over the transaction. The IRS and the FBI were not going to hunt down a missing broker who had vanished offshore. They were going to look directly at the man who had authorized the theft. He was going to prison. He was going to spend decades in a federal penitentiary, completely stripped of his tailored suits, his country club memberships, and his pathetic, fragile ego. His phone vibrated on the floor beside him. He stared at it through a blur of terrified tears. It was a text message from his mother, Valerie. "Do not attempt to contact your sister, Tasha. She is completely hysterical." Brent cleaned out their personal joint savings accounts before he disappeared. He left her with nothing but a mountain of credit card debt. "You brought this disaster into our family by trying to steal from Maya. Do not call this number again. The family lawyer advises we sever all communication with you to avoid implication in your federal investigation." Marcus let out a raw, broken sob, curling into a tight ball on the dusty floor. He had traded an incredibly intelligent, successful, and loyal wife for a naive mistress who had immediately turned on him the second the money disappeared. He had traded a secure, luxurious life in a $2 million estate for an impending prison cell. His mother had entirely disowned him. His sister was ruined. His brother-in-law had robbed him blind. The trap had snapped shut, crushing every single bone in his fabricated, arrogant life. Maya had not just defeated him, she had systematically, beautifully orchestrated a scenario where his own greed, his own lies, and his own toxic family had utterly destroyed him from the inside out. He had dug his own grave, poured the concrete over his own feet, and all Maya had to do was stand back and watch him sink beneath the waves. The harsh, vibrating buzz of a cell phone shattered the dead silence of the gutted 14th floor office. Marcus jerked upright from the dusty concrete, his heart slamming against his ribs with enough force to crack bone. He scrambled for the device, his sweaty fingers slipping against the glass screen. The caller identification flashed a name that sent a jolt of pure, desperate adrenaline straight into his bloodstream. Brent. Marcus swiped the screen to answer, his hands shaking so violently he nearly dropped the device. He pressed it hard against his ear, his breathing ragged and shallow. The scene immediately fractured into two distinct realities, a stark visual split screen of two men at the absolute opposite ends of a catastrophic financial collapse. On one side was Marcus kneeling in the dirt of an abandoned commercial building, his $1,000 tailored suit covered in gray dust, his silk tie loosened and askew, sweat pouring down his terrified face. On the other side of the split reality was Brent. He was strolling smoothly through the wide, brightly lit concourse of the Atlanta International Airport. Brent was dressed in pristine resort wear, a pair of expensive sunglasses pushed up into his styled hair, holding a leather weekender bag with a relaxed, casual grip. "Brent, where the hell are you?" Marcus screamed into the phone, the raw panic stripping away any remaining shred of his executive dignity. "I am standing in the middle of your office. It is completely empty. The doors are locked. The desks are gone. Where is my money, Brent?" A smooth, entirely unbothered chuckle echoed through the receiver. Behind Brent and his mocking laughter, the distinct chiming chime of an airport public address system rang out, followed by a crisp female voice announcing the final boarding call for a direct flight to Cancun, Mexico. Marcus froze, the sound of the airport terminal dropping the temperature of his blood to absolute zero. "My dear, gullible Marcus Brent," replied his voice dripping with a thick, suffocating layer of condescension and utter contempt. "Thank you so much for the $1.2 million. You really came through for the family when it mattered most. I am currently walking toward my gate. The weather in Mexico is supposed to be absolutely phenomenal this time of year. You cannot be at the airport." Marcus gasped, his vision swimming the glass walls of the empty office seeming to bend and warp around him. "You were supposed to be securing my assets. You told me the offshore trust in the Cayman Islands was ready. You promised me the money was untouchable by Maya and her lawyers." "It is untouchable," Brent said smoothly, pausing his stride to hand his premium boarding pass to the gate attendant. "It is completely untouchable by Maya, by the federal government, and especially by you. My boutique brokerage firm has been completely bankrupt for 6 months, Marcus. We were drowning in toxic commercial real estate debt. I was personally on the hook to some highly aggressive, unregulated private lenders in the Caymans. Men who do not send collection letters. Men who send individuals to your house to break your knees." Marcus pressed his free hand against his chest, feeling as if the air was being physically sucked out of his lungs. "I needed a miracle to pay them off." Brent continued, his tone conversational, as if he were discussing a golf handicap rather than a multi-million-dollar betrayal. "And then my arrogant brother-in-law came crying to me about a messy divorce. You handed me the exact amount of liquid capital I needed to clear my debts and vanish. I did not put your money into a trust, Marcus. I wired it directly to my creditors. Your stolen cash bought my freedom." "You are completely insane," Marcus roared, spittle flying from his lips as he pushed himself up from the floor, pacing the empty room like a trapped, rabid animal. "That was not my personal savings. That was stolen money. It was federal corporate tax revenue. The Internal Revenue Service has frozen every single account I own. I am going to call the Atlanta police. I am going to call the FBI. I am going to tell them exactly what you did, and they will pull you off that plane and lock you in a cage for the rest of your miserable life." "Go right ahead, Marcus." Brent laughed, the sound sharp and entirely devoid of fear. "Call them. Call the FBI. Call the Department of Justice. Tell them everything. But let us review the actual legal reality of your situation before you make that call." Brent stepped onto the jet bridge, the ambient noise of the airport terminal fading into a quiet, muffled hum. "Did I hack into your corporate accounts?" Marcus Brent asked rhetorically. "No. Did I hold a gun to your head and force you to authorize the transfer?" "No. You voluntarily logged into the MCOR system using your own active proxy credentials. You generated the wire transfer yourself. You typed in the routing numbers, and then you voluntarily signed a comprehensive power of attorney, granting my firm absolute legal discretion to invest those funds as we saw fit." Marcus stopped pacing. He stood perfectly still in the center of the abandoned office, the terrifying ironclad truth of Brent and his words hitting him with the force of a speeding freight train. In the eyes of the law, Brent explained, his voice turning cold and clinical. You are a disgruntled executive who maliciously embezzled federal tax funds from your wealthy wife and her corporation. You are a thief. I am simply an unfortunate, incompetent investment broker whose firm collapsed under market pressure. I made a bad investment with your capital and the money was lost in a catastrophic market failure. It is a civil dispute between a broker and a client. It is a tragedy, really. But it is not a crime. You, on the other hand, committed federal wire fraud, corporate espionage, and tax evasion the very second you clicked confirm on that transfer. Brent paused, letting the devastating weight of the legal reality settle heavily onto Marcus and his shoulders. You have absolutely no proof of collusion, Marcus Brent concluded softly. You handed me clean money, and you kept the dirty hands. The feds are not going to waste millions of dollars launching an international manhunt for a failed broker in Mexico. They have the man who stole the money right there in Atlanta served up on a silver platter. They have the digital footprint. They have the motive. They have you. You cannot do this to me, Marcus, wept his voice, entirely breaking the arrogant, polished veneer of the senior vice president, completely destroyed. We are family, Brent. I am your brother-in-law. Tasha is your wife. How could you leave her with nothing? She will be ruined. Tasha was a liability, Brent replied without a single ounce of hesitation or remorse. She spends money faster than I could ever steal it. You and your entire family are nothing but a collection of toxic, greedy parasites who thought you could ride on the coattails of Maya and her success forever. Maya finally woke up and cut you off. I simply took advantage of your panic to secure my own exit strategy. Please, Brent, Marcus begged, dropping back down to his knees on the concrete floor, openly sobbing into the phone. I will do anything. I will sign anything. Just send a fraction of it back. Send me enough to hire a defense attorney. I am going to federal prison. They are going to lock me away. I have absolutely nothing left. That sounds like a personal problem, Marcus, Brent said, his voice entirely detached, completely devoid of any remaining humanity. Take care of yourself. Enjoy federal prison. I hear the food is terrible. The line clicked. The call disconnected. The split-screen reality vanished, leaving Marcus entirely alone. The silence of the gutted office roared in his ears, louder and more terrifying than any siren. He stared at the dark screen of his cell phone, his mind completely fracturing under the immense, crushing weight of his reality. He was ruined. It was not a temporary setback. It was not a minor embarrassment. It was total, absolute, inescapable annihilation. The camera began a slow, deliberate orbit shot around Marcus, circling him as he knelt in the center of the empty room. As the camera rotated, the true magnitude of his destruction became painfully visible in his physical collapse. He had lost Maya, the brilliant, fiercely loyal woman who had secretly funded his entire lifestyle and protected him from his own incompetence for 7 years. He had lost Chloe, the young, naive mistress who had only wanted him for the mansion he did not own and the money he did not actually possess. He had lost the Beacon Hill estate, the ultimate symbol of his fabricated success. He had lost his career, his reputation, and his standing in the elite financial community. His own mother had disowned him, refusing to risk her own comfort to save him from a federal indictment. His brother-in-law had robbed him blind, exploiting his blind panic to fund a tropical escape. The orbit shot completed its slow, merciless circle, capturing Marcus from every angle as he finally dropped his phone. The device clattered against the dusty concrete. Marcus bent forward, pressing his forehead against the cold floor, curling his body inward until he was nothing more than a pathetic, trembling ball of ruined silk and shattered ego. He clutched the sides of his head, letting out a long, agonizing wail of pure despair that echoed hollowly off the glass walls. He had believed he was a predator, a master manipulator who could outsmart his wife and control his destiny. He realized far too late that he had never been the predator. He had always been the prey. And Maya had not even needed to strike the final blow. She had simply removed the fences, stepped back, and allowed the wolves of his own family to completely devour him alive. Valerie smoothed the silk of her own gown, her hands trembling just enough to betray the ice in her veins. She turned toward the vanity, where Chloe sat draped in a borrowed $5,000 designer dress that still bore the faint metallic scent of the rental agency. Chloe looked pale, her eyes wide with a frantic animalistic fear that no amount of heavy contouring could mask. "We are going to walk in there, and we are going to act as if nothing has changed." Valerie hissed, her voice vibrating with a dangerous, brittle intensity. "If anyone asks about the Beacon Hill estate, you tell them it is undergoing extensive interior remodeling. If anyone asks about Marcus and his professional absence, you tell them he is finalizing a major acquisition in Europe. Do you understand?" Chloe nodded, her throat working hard to swallow. Her hands rested protectively on her stomach, a nervous tic she had developed over the last 48 hours. She looked less like a triumphant mistress, and more like a sacrificial lamb being led to the slaughterhouse of social expectations. Marcus stood by the heavy mahogany door, his tuxedo jacket ill-fitting his face, a mask of gaunt gray exhaustion. He had not slept. He had not eaten. Every time the phone in his pocket vibrated, he flinched as if it were a tactical strike. He was a man hollowed out by the looming shadow of a federal indictment, yet he was still bound by his mother's desperate, suffocating need to maintain the lie of the Williams family legacy. He offered Chloe a cold, limp hand. She took it, her fingers ice cold. "Remember," Valerie whispered, her eyes darting to her reflection one last time to ensure her mask of icy perfection was firmly in place. "Appearances are the only currency that matters tonight. If we lose the social narrative, we lose everything." Outside, the cool evening air of downtown Atlanta was thick with the scent of pine and expensive floral arrangements. The grand entrance of the Symphony Hall was ablaze with spotlights, the flashbulbs of the waiting paparazzi creating a chaotic, rhythmic strobe effect. Luxury vehicles lined the curb, a procession of high-end engineering depositing the city's most powerful people onto the velvet carpet. A sleek, elongated black limousine glided to a silent stop at the center of the drop-off zone. The driver, clad in crisp charcoal livery, jumped out to open the door with practiced fluid motion. I stepped out first. The cool night air hit my face, grounding me. My emerald silk gown caught the light of the paparazzi flashbulbs, shimmering like deep polished stone. I adjusted my posture, letting the weight of the last 3 days settle into a foundation of steel. I did not look like the betrayed wife. I did not look like the victim of a federal embezzlement scheme. I looked like the architect of a new order. Behind me, the CEO of the metropolitan banking firm, a man whose institution held the primary mortgages for every major property in the city, stepped out to offer me his arm. He leaned in close, his voice a low, confidential murmur. "The board of directors is expecting a very interesting keynote address tonight, Maya. I am curious to see how you intend to dismantle the competition." I offered him a thin, razor-sharp smile, my eyes scanning the crowd of socialites and executives surging toward the entrance. "Consider it a demolition," I replied. "The foundation was rotten from the start. Tonight we simply clear the site." The flashbulbs erupted in a sustained, blinding wave as I began my walk toward the velvet carpet. I was the embodiment of grace and corporate might. And as I walked, I knew that in less than an hour, the name Marcus Williams would be nothing more than a cautionary tale whispered in the dark corners of the financial district. The game was over. I had already won. "I do not need your pity, Valerie," I said, my voice cutting through the sudden hush of the ballroom like a well-honed blade. "I am here because the board of directors requested my presence to discuss the future of the MCOR corporate assets. Assets that, as you seem to have forgotten, are currently under federal investigation, due to your son's unfortunate yet predictable lack of discretion." The color drained from Valerie and her face so rapidly that for a second I thought she might actually collapse into the champagne fountain. Marcus let out a choked, desperate sound, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. Chloe, however, merely smirked clearly, having no concept of the magnitude of the disaster surrounding her. She stepped forward, her silk dress rustling against the floor, and placed a hand on Marcus and his arm in a pathetic display of ownership. "Maya, you are clearly delusional," Chloe sneered, her voice shrill and desperate to reclaim the narrative. "Marcus is the president of this holding company. You are nothing but an ex-wife with a grudge." I turned my full attention to Chloe, my expression entirely devoid of emotion. I did not see a woman. I saw a pawn that Marcus had moved across a board he did not understand. Chloe, I said softly as if speaking to a child, you are wearing a $5,000 gown that Marcus rented on a credit card currently frozen by federal authorities. You are not holding a trophy. You are holding a sinking anchor. If you check your bank account, you will find it is currently being audited by the IRS. You should probably stop shopping and start looking for a criminal defense attorney. The room erupted in a chaotic murmur of shocked whispers. The CEO of the metropolitan banking firm, standing firmly by my side, leaned in and tapped his glass, signaling for the orchestra to halt. The entire ballroom fell into a suffocating, expectant silence. Valerie stepped into my personal space, her eyes blazing with a frantic, desperate fury. She leaned in, her voice a poisonous hiss. You think you have won, Maya? You think you can destroy this family with your little games and your petty revenge? I will drag you through every court in this state. I will see you ruined for this public spectacle. I tilted my head, studying her with genuine curiosity. You are so obsessed with appearances, Valerie, that you have completely failed to notice that you are already destitute. Marcus did not just steal from me, he stole from the federal government. Every person in this room, every donor to your foundation, and every partner in your husband's firm is currently being notified of the ongoing federal investigation. You are not losing your social standing, you are losing your entire life. Marcus tried to step forward, his eyes wild but his knees buckled and he nearly collapsed onto the marble floor. The CEO of the bank stepped between us, his gaze fixed on Marcus with cold, professional disdain. Mr. Williams, the CEO said, his voice projecting clearly to the entire room. We have received the subpoena regarding the M-Corps embezzlement. Your seat on the board has been vacated as of 5 minutes ago. Security is waiting outside to escort you off the premises. I turned my back on them, the emerald silk of my gown swaying with a finality that silenced any further protest. The performance was over. The stage belonged to me. The entire ballroom seemed to shrink around Marcus, the walls of glass and polished mahogany closing in like the bars of a cage. I didn't rush. I didn't shout. I simply held the document out, the red seal catching the chandelier light, a silent witness to his undoing. Brent didn't just steal your money, Marcus. He used you as a human shield, I said, my voice echoing off the high ceilings, clear and devoid of any warmth. He knew the regulators were watching the M-Corps accounts, so he fed you the bait, let you take the fall, and funneled the liability directly onto your personal assets. You aren't just an embezzler anymore, Marcus. You are the sole guarantor of a $15 million shell company debt that now officially belongs to you. Marcus stared at the document, his eyes darting across the lines of text he had signed without reading. His hands began to tremor, the paper rustling like dry leaves. He looked at Valerie, then at Chloe, his face a grotesque mask of realization. That is not possible, he whispered, though the strength had leaked out of his voice, leaving it a hollow, broken rasp. Brent is my brother-in-law. He told me this was a secure trust. He told you what you wanted to hear because you were too arrogant to listen to the truth, I replied, stepping back to give the CEO of the bank room to work. You were so busy planning your opulent new life that you didn't bother to conduct even the most basic due diligence on your own partners. The CEO stepped forward, his expression carved from granite. Marcus, the federal authorities are already in the lobby. They have the audit trails showing you initiated every single fraudulent wire. There is no defense for this. You are looking at 20 years minimum. Valerie tried to intercept her hand, reaching out to grab the CEO's arm, but he pulled away with an expression of pure distaste. This family is radioactive, he said, his voice loud enough for the nearby clusters of guests to hear. We are cutting all ties to the Williams name effective immediately. Every credit line, every business loan, every personal account linked to your firm is terminated. Chloe let out a shrill, hysterical laugh, clutching her stomach. This is a joke, right, Marcus? Tell them it is a joke. Marcus didn't answer. He couldn't. He was staring at the double doors of the ballroom where two grim-faced federal agents were already striding through the crowd. They didn't look like guests. They didn't look like friends. They looked like the end. I watched as the agents stopped just feet away, the crowd parting for them, as if they were ghosts. I didn't need to stay for the arrest. I didn't need to hear the handcuffs click. I had already won. I turned toward the exit, my emerald gown sweeping behind me like a victory banner. I had systematically dismantled the facade, exposed the rot, and ensured that the price of their betrayal would be their entire existence. The night was cold, but for the first time in years, the air felt perfectly, undeniably clean. The chaos in the ballroom reached a fever pitch as Chloe's confession echoed off the crystal chandeliers. She didn't just abandon Marcus, she obliterated the final thread of his sanity. The elite guests, who only moments before had been sipping champagne and calculating their own professional distance from the Williams family, were now huddled together, phones out, recording every agonizing second of the collapse. I stood in the center of the storm, my composure as fixed as a diamond. Marcus looked up at me from his position on the cold marble, his eyes frantic, searching my face for a trace of the woman who had once stood by his side through every failed board meeting and every fragile ego crisis. He found nothing but the reflection of his own ruin. The federal agents moved with mechanical precision. There was no room for negotiation, no space for the entitled rhetoric Marcus had spent his entire life mastering. As they hauled him to his feet, the sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the loudest noise in the room, a sharp metallic period at the end of his arrogant narrative. Valerie lay on the floor, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. Her carefully curated life, a fortress built on the bones of lies and social posturing, had finally caved in. She stared at the ceiling, her hands still clutching the hem of her gown, realizing that the prestige she had sacrificed everything for was now the very thing ensuring her downfall. She had spent decades obsessing over how the family was perceived, and now the entire city was watching their final performance. Chloe, meanwhile, was already calculating her next move. She was shouting at the agents, trying to deflect the blame toward Marcus, her voice cracking as she realized her proximity to him was a fast track to prison rather than a path to luxury. She had gambled on Marcus's bank account, and she had lost everything. I signaled to the CEO of the bank, and with a silent nod, he stepped forward to finalize the paperwork that would dissolve the Williams family's remaining holdings. As Marcus was led away, the crowd parted in silent, judgmental waves. They didn't see a successful businessman being unjustly targeted. They saw a fraud being dismantled. My driver held the ballroom door open for me. I paused for a split second, looking back at the wreckage. The music had stopped entirely. The silence was heavy with the weight of justice being served in real time. I walked out into the crisp Atlanta night, the cool air biting at my skin, a sharp reminder that the nightmare was over. I didn't look back to see if Valerie had been helped up or if Chloe was still screaming in the lobby. Their misery was no longer my concern. The empire of lies had fallen, and in its place I was free to build my own world, one rooted in substance, integrity, and the sweet cold satisfaction of the truth. My phone buzzed in my clutch, but I silenced it. I had everything I needed.